Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 7 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay or Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Andrew Sheets with us now with Morgan Stanley. We're thrilled that he could be with us today. Andrew, the first thing I did in honor of your Brown University mathematics is I took core CPI, the series, not the year over year, month over month, the series, and I don't have a first or second derivative convexity towards disinflation. Does Morgan Stanley see disinflation in place, or can you not say that after the report?
Yeah, so we do see disinflation in place, although, not yet. Inflation is still holding up through the end of the year. Where we, I think, are a little bit more optimistic on inflation than the consensus is next year, where we see inflation coming down. And I think importantly, it's really coming down in the first half of the year, where for the incoming Trump administration, we think it's going to be a case where policy has kind of fast announcement, but slow implementation. You don't get the inflationary effects of tariffs, of immigration changes until kind of in the back half of 2025. And in the first part of the year, we think that a lot of the inflation, which is being driven by shelter, auto insurance, that can come down, that those series are running kind of well ahead of where the real economy markets for those are, and that some of the difficult seasonality in January and February, which previously has boosted inflation, we think that actually sets an attractive bar that might make it a little bit easier for inflation to be a little bit better than expected. So we do see inflation coming down. We see that disinflation the first half of the year, and we think that will mean that the Fed cuts not just this month, but in January as well.
Is that, so get a sense there, Andrew, where out there are you suggesting your clients really think about adding some risk, if anywhere, as they think about 2025?
Yeah, so I think as a house, I think we are more optimistic than consensus on duration. We think that bond yields will fall. We think that fall will be concentrated in the first half of the year as the Fed ends up cutting a little bit more than expected, as inflation falls a little bit more than expected, and as I think some of the inflationary impacts of policy change take longer than expected to develop. And, I think an important part that our interest rate strategists have been talking about, but it also applies to credit, is, fixed income markets have been operating under this very difficult environment of a very flat or inverted yield curve. There's been very little carry in the asset class. If the Fed continues to cut as we expect, if the ECB continues to cut as we expect, we think the European Central Bank will take policy rates down to just 1% by the end of next year. That's going to provide, I think, a much better carry environment for fixed income and be supportive of duration.
Credit risk. How much credit risk are you suggesting folks take here these days, given that the 2-year Treasury is at 4.12%?
So I think credit's also a story, I think, of a little bit of a better first half and then maybe a more challenging second half. So spreads are low. I don't think this is a case where ourselves or really any credit investor is loading up on a large amount of credit risk. But it's also one where I think you have to be kind of careful about timing that short or timing that underweight. The credit, we think, can remain somewhat tighter for longer than the market's expecting. So we're expecting U.S. credit spreads, European credit spreads to actually be a little bit tighter by the middle of next year, and then maybe have a more difficult second half.
Andrew, just one final question here. It's too short a visit today. We want to get you on for a much longer chat as well. You're sitting over the holidays, and you got family members going, Andrew, we don't understand your world, but is capitalism, is finance in place? Is this a normal time?
Well, I think what we are looking at is a much wider range of outcomes looking ahead. And I think the new incoming administration increases the odds of boom and a larger capital market rebound. And it increases the odds of stagflation, of weaker growth and higher inflation. If you look at Morgan Stanley's economic outlook, our strategy outlook, which we published a couple of weeks ago, you'll see that in our forecasts. You'll see that in our numbers. You'll see that in this wider range of outcomes. So I think we are moving from a very moderate outcome, which was outstanding for credit and good for the equity market as well, to something that's a lot less moderate. And it might not be bad. It might be good, but it's a wider range of outcomes that we're dealing with.
Too short a visit. Andrew Sheets, thank you so much. We'll do it again. Morgan Stanley.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Or watch us live on YouTube.
When you get a new office at Stanford University, it's like you live in Harvard. I mean, it's like gorgeous out there.
I know, perfect.
Her public service to this nation has been extraordinary. We're going to squeeze in a couple minutes here. She has just served Secretary Raimondo at Commerce, but far more before that, she served all of us with absolutely definitive coverage of China. Her third revolution is a definitive cover-to-cover read on President Xi. Elizabeth Economy, now at Stanford University. Dr. Economy, thank you so much for joining Bloomberg Surveillance. What is our intelligence on Beijing? Is it general sense? Do we know what's going on with the Chinese leadership?
I think we have a reasonably good idea of where Xi Jinping wants to take the country. If you're asking, do we have good visibility into the inner workings of the Standing Committee of the Politburo, the top 7 people that rule the country, I'd have to say the answer is probably not at this point. But I think we have a fairly clear sense, both in terms of what China's doing at home and its foreign policies, about overall directionally where Xi Jinping wants to take the country.
How is their military projection? I mean, from the budget standpoint, we can talk about deflation in China and the capitalism or non-capitalism of China, but the fear, the arch fear across all, including the South China Sea, is their military projection. Are they funding? Are they a defense? Are they an offense juggernaut?
No, absolutely. I mean, they have the largest military in the world. Their Navy is now larger than ours. You can see with the activity that they've been undertaking over the past, 6 months, sort of accelerated military activity in the Taiwan Strait, in the South China Sea, very aggressive. And I think this is all part of, one of Xi Jinping's major sort of directives is really to reclaim the territory that he considers to be Chinese sovereign territory. And so I think they use any excuse they can to sort of do these military exercises, I think in the hopes basically to coerce other countries and Taiwan just to accede to Chinese demands. That hasn't happened yet, but I think that really is the intention. So there's been no let up, despite the challenges in the Chinese economy. There's been no let up in terms of their spending on defense, in terms of the overall trajectory of their military and their desire to be able to project force in meaningful ways.
Dr. Economy, what do you believe the Chinese view is of President-elect Trump here?
So I think, look, there are as many, views in China about President Trump as there are in the United States. I think there are people who welcome President Trump for a range of reasons. There are people who are kind of, MAGA Chinese who like the president's views around values, or at least the views that were expressed during the campaign around values. There are people who think that President Trump is going to be good for China because he's going to pull the United States, back out of a number of international institutions, things like the World Health Organization or the Paris Climate Accords, and leave a lot of space for China to assert its leadership on the global stage. People who think that there are going to be problems between the United States and our allies because President Trump has a sort of more transactional approach to how to navigate our relations there. And so, we saw a lot of problems in the first Trump term with our European allies that China tried to exploit. I think they're thinking in those terms again. Are they going to have opportunities like that? At the same time, of course, President Trump has promised variously to level, 60% tariffs on, all Chinese exports, 25% tariffs, 10% tariffs. We don't know where, the number's going to land. We don't know whether it's going to be whether the tariffs are basically, the threat of tariffs is basically a tool to get China back to the negotiating table. All of these things are sort of up in the air at this point in time. So a mix of views, I think, about what President Trump might mean for the country.
One of the chapters, Liz, in the Third Revolution, the Lion Awakens. That is the arch fear, bipartisan fear of America. You live this in real time with Gina Raimondo at Commerce. In the Trump administration, we assume the lion awakens. How do we quiet the lion in the coming 4 years?
I mean, I'm not sure that there's really a way to quiet the lion. I think there's a way to ensure that the United States, is the dragon, I guess, in the sense that, what I think our message should be is that we're still looking toward U.S. leadership on the global stage, right? And U.S. technological leadership and military leadership and leadership in the values domain. I think, to me, what we want to do is to run faster. I sometimes worry that we over-index on our defensive tools. And so that would be a concern, I think, with President Trump and, sort of the approach of just levying more tariffs. I'd like to see us invest more, in science and technologies. We're still waiting to see the science part of the CHIPS Act. I think that, to me, is what the United States needs to do, and not simply say, we don't want China to do this, stop China from doing that.
Liz, you were 20-something, and you were at Michigan, and you changed the world where the river runs black on the environment in China. You, more than anyone, has been over there more often. GM just pulled out of China effectively. Is American investment dead in terms of JV or investment in China?
It's not dead, but there certainly has been a precipitous fall off. And it's not just the United States. It's, FDI into China overall. So our European partners are the same way, Asian partners, same thing. I think there's just a sense that China has not been welcoming to private enterprise. Combination of factors, things like the anti-espionage law, controls around data, the lack of information around what's going on inside the Chinese economy, right? The Chinese have been constricting the types of economic information that they're willing to share. And then there are Chinese, areas where China has just become far more competitive. And I think the car industry is a good example of that, where I think multinationals find it more difficult to compete. But China doesn't want FDI to drop off this way, but they're sort of caught, I think, in a bind because Xi Jinping isn't really willing to undertake the steps necessary to open the door back up to private enterprise, even in his own private enterprise. I think it's problematic.
Exactly, and that's kind of where I wanted to go, Elizabeth. I mean, does President Xi, closing off his country to foreign direct investment and to just the world, it's not just technology, it's just broader trade, and is there real support for that type of policy in China?
Well, I think, the way that Xi Jinping can drum up support for this. And so let me say, I think certainly not. I think, the private sector in China has certainly suffered over the past decade in some. I don't think there is a lot of support. There are reform-oriented economists who've tried to get Xi Jinping to, take his hands off the controls. So I think, no, I don't think there's widespread support, but I do think to the extent that China feels as though it's under assault from things like tariffs or export controls, that bolsters Xi Jinping's, argument for dual circulation, the argument that China can innovate, manufacture, and consume largely within itself. Again, Xi Jinping doesn't want to close off, he certainly wants China to export. And he wants companies to invest in China. He wants them to bring, high technology, stuff that China doesn't have, he welcomes. But he's also committed to making China, indigenously capable.
What is your first, I think about Jonathan Spence holding court at Yale. What a privilege it would have been to be in that classroom. It's Stanford among the elite cherubs, Liz Economy. What's your first message in the first lecture on Liz Economy's China?
China has a transformative vision for the international system and for China's place within it. And the United States needs to step up its game.
Good. Liz, we need another book. Get to work. She's working like a 4-hour work week out at Stanford. Elizabeth,
I'm up at 6:15 to do this. What do you mean?
Yeah, see at Eli's Coffee on Madison. Elizabeth Economy, thank you so much for joining us. She's professor at Stanford University.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 7 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Joining us now, I'm going to give too short an introduction. He deserves a much longer one. Is Robert Hormats. Some people talk, others do. And back to the tenure of Secretary Kissinger, Bob Hormats has traveled the miles of the Levant and Eastern Mediterranean in chaos. Now, to be clear here, you weren't there for the Great Syrian Revolt of 1925, 1927.
I missed that.
You missed that one.
Yes, that's right.
Why is Syria different now than the mess Paul Sweeney and I grew up with? What's different now versus Kissinger and Hormats in the 70s?
Two things mainly. One, you had Hafiz al-Assad running the place.
The father of
the
Assad.
father of the son who's just vacated his throne to go to Russia. But Hafiz al-Assad did not want big dust-ups with the Israelis. As a matter of fact, he was the one who created that buffer zone that was now being occupied appropriately by Israel because the Syrians have pulled out of it. But second, in trying to get a settlement in the Sinai, we always tried to keep good relations with the Saudis, the Syrians, and others, the UAE and other countries in the region, including the Iraqis. So, and even the Iranians at that point. So there was a much better dialogue among the various countries to try to get some disengagement between the Israelis and the Egyptians, which ultimately did work. But it took, in the Middle East, you have to see a lot of people because there are a lot of power centers. And the other thing in Syria is it's really an amalgam. You have the Kurds, you have the Alawites, you have the Sunnis, you have the Shiites, and they're all taking different points of view.
Hormats owns this. I just watched Lawrence of Arabia, but Hormats owns it. I mean,
Bob, what does this mean, this change we're seeing taking place in Syria? What does it mean for Russia and Iran in that part of the world there?
It dramatically weakens Russia's presence there. Russia is seen by the Syrian people as having supported Bashar al-Assad. They are not very well liked. They have one base, Latika, and then they have a seaport. They want to keep them. I think that'll be part of the negotiation, but I can't imagine the average Syrian wants them to stay there. And Iran has had its allies, in effect, get decapitated or weakened very badly. So all of its tentacles, essentially the Houthis are still there, but the others are gone. And
should the
Hezbollah
U.S.
is
focus?
weaker.
Should the U.S. let Erdogan take the northern border of Syria to the southern border of Turkey? Worry about the Kurds. That's never going to go away. Should the United States project to southern and southwestern Syria to try to provide stability around Damascus, north to Homs, or is there a different approach?
Well, there are two really good points there. One, I think we have to work closely with the Turks, but I also think that we have to remember that the Kurds were part of the coalition of forces that overthrew Assad, and therefore we have done a lot of bad things to the Kurds and sort of pulled the rug out from under them in the past. I think we want to try to convince the Turks to work with the Syrian Kurds and not go in there and take advantage of this and weaken them.
Okay, this is too an important conversation. I'm not going to mince words. I got a tweet out this morning with the president-elect making fun of Canada is the 51st state. Do we have a potential sobriety and gravitas in state to handle these incredible nuances of the Levant? I don't see it.
Well, it's very complicated, and people in the past have found it very difficult. But you know, you have to work with the Kurds because they're part of this coalition. You have to work with the Turks because they're actually now the most powerful country other than Israel in the area. And Iran's ability to exercise influence has diminished dramatically. The Hezbollah has been weakened. Its friends in Syria are gone. That whole notion of moving arms from the Iran to Lebanon is really diminished or probably eliminated for the moment. So we have to have a very subtle diplomacy, and you have to talk to all the parties. That's the one thing we learned about the shuttle diplomacy. You couldn't just talk to the Egyptians and the Israelis. You had to talk to others because it's a complicated area. And if you want to preserve peace, you've got to have a dialogue with a lot of people, and that means sort of steady focus.
What do you think under President-elect Trump our role will likely be in that part of the world over the next several years?
I think he's probably of the view that we should pull back and do relatively little. I don't think he has this fierce, or a lot of people around him has this fierce anti-Iranian point of view. And the Iranians now are probably going to be spending less money on their friends and allies in the region who are now, for the most part, decapitated or unable to perform anything like what the Iranians hoped, which was their surrogates in the region. They can't play that role anymore. So the Iranians probably are going to spend more time on nuclear. On the other hand, to strengthen their own power. On the other hand, we have to demonstrate that we have good allies in the region, good friends in the region, and strengthen our relations both with Israel and with the Sunni Arabs on the other side of the Gulf.
We're anxiously awaiting Robert D. Hormats' The Price of Liberty 2.0. We expect that book out. The movie rights have already been sold. The heart and soul of Hormats' diplomacy is a fiscal soundness at home. What happened, Bob Hormats?
What happened is that fiscal policy is broken in this country, that each side makes compromises with the other on tax cuts or spending increases. The budget deficit is really out of control, and so far there have been very little, other than talk, very little in the way of specific measures to curb the budget deficit. And if the U.S. continues to have a big budget deficit, it's going to dig into and reduce the ability to provide money for our defense. We need a strong defense system in a world of war. We're in a world of trade wars, and we're in the world of actual wars. And we're going to need to have a strong defense capability and a strong industrial base to support our defense capability and put more money into defense technology, which is extremely important. Most wars in the future will be fought by drones, by effective data use, by effective intelligence. And the United States is going to have to be ahead of the game on intelligence, ahead of the game on these non-manned military weapons. And that's going to be extremely important. And a much more coordinated battlefield with the Navy, the Army, the Air Force, and others working together. And data is what's going to enable them to coordinate better, which we need.
Bob, what is your view of Russia at the moment? I mean, they're obviously got their hands tied in Ukraine. How should this incoming administration deal with Russia over the next several years and Mr. Putin over the next several years?
First of all, I think the U.S. has to continue to support Ukraine. I know it's going to be expensive. I know it's not as popular as it was. I know there are people in the administration who don't want to do this, but a demonstration of weakness, of tentativeness, of fecklessness with respect to Ukraine will send signals all up and down. And finally, we're getting, we talked about the domino effect before, and the other way that George Kennan talked about domino effect, countries falling into the Russian orbit. Now they're falling away from the Russian orbit. All of its friends, Syria, it probably won't be able to use those bases. All the bets it made in the Gulf are probably going to go sour. And I suspect that we have to talk to them, but I don't think they're as powerful as they were. But we also have to demonstrate that NATO is going to protect all the other countries in the region, the Estonians, the Latvias, the Lithuanians, and make it very clear that we are part of the single most important part of deterrence, so the Russians don't do this again.
You're the only one I can ask this question to with immense respect for your service. We are 1 year on from the death of Henry Kissinger. What do you miss the most about working day to day with Dr. Kissinger?
I miss his good judgment. He understood the way the world works. He had a dialogue actually with Putin, with Xi Jinping, with the President Biden, and he did have one with Trump.
Right.
I think Kissinger understood that you have to have effective diplomacy.
Right.
You have to have a steady diplomacy where you work with other countries. You had to be seen to be reliable and predictable. Great powers cannot afford to be misunderstood by their allies or their friends. And he got that, and he also understood you need a strong military to back up your diplomacy.
I got to make some news today. 20 seconds. Have you spoke to Secretary of State designate Marco Rubio?
No, I have not recently. No, I've spoken to him when he was a senator, but I have not spoken since he's been picked.
I can say Hormats. The young Hormats could go down to state and straighten him out.
Take care.
Robert Hormats, brilliant. Thank you so much. Of course, Vice Chairman at Kissinger Associates. Good to see you this holiday.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 7 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.
And our look at the front page is the Lisa Mateo moment here on Bloomberg Surveillance. Lisa, I didn't look at your list, but one of the interns said, this is just really something. Go.
But wait, newspapers is now a moment, not an hour? What is going on?
It's a moment. I talked to your PR people. They want to market it as a moment. That was a 2-hour meeting.
I have a new luxury destination that you might want to check out, okay? Luxury travelers, they are heading to this. It's California Soar's East Cape. It's about 45 miles northeast of Los Cabos, that big tourist area. So the East Cape, it's big for fishing, least traveled areas because people like it. It's secluded, okay? But now you start to have these luxury resorts that are coming in. Back in 2019, you had the Four Seasons. They opened their Costas Palmas resort, 118 rooms, okay? You got fine dining, golf course, but it comes with a price tag. Are you ready for it, guys? You're going to have to pay about $1,000 a night. Okay, that's where it starts at. And they have 2 more ultra luxury resorts coming. Some are offering residences.
So this is the tippy of Baja.
Yes, very, very tippy.
Way down, like
where people don't go.
It's like directly west of Mazatlan, across the Gulf of California.
Yes. So if you don't like to deal with a lot of people in a big tourist attraction, this is the place where they're going.
It's on Sweeney's bucket list, just like that.
It's Sweeney's.
You're going to Costco.
He's booking
and
flights
I'm,
already.
Walking down to Dangerous Provisions, and you're going to go to, what's it called? East Cape?
East Cape, yes.
Good. Yes.
And they're even having residences there
Costa
that
Palmas.
start for about $750,000 for a studio apartment. So
There you go.
You can get into that too if you really want to stay. All right, I'm moving on to Tom Brady. Big Sotheby's auction. Okay, the watches, the sports memorabilia. It all sold. There were about 41 lots for $9 million total. Okay.
Why is he selling this stuff? Does he need cash?
That's a good question because the story doesn't get into those details.
Giselle said you're a little late.
Yeah, exactly.
How many kids does he have? He's got a lot of kids. So here are a few of the standouts. So if you want to go sports memorabilia side, the top one was a football he used to break the NFL all-time passing yards record, but also a University of Michigan jersey that he wore during his final college game. That was top dollar. And then you have, the watches. He has the pricey watches. The Rolex Daytona Paul Newman John Player Special. Over $1 million just for that one itself.
It's a nice looking watch, but I don't think it's worth $1 million.
It's a very nice looking watch. Or if you like the custom-made Audemars Piguet. Did I say that right? Hopefully.
I did. Royal Oak watch sold.
It's out of my price range.
$720,000.
$720,000. He actually wore that during the Netflix roast.
Can I editorial here?
Yeah.
I heard Tom Brady on Fox doing color announcing football 4 or 5 weeks ago. He was so bad I had to turn it off.
Really?
And I turned it on this weekend, and this is typical Brady. He was really quite good.
Yeah,
I think
he's good. Now the question I have is he can he continue doing this? Why would you want to work? I don't know if it's that hard. You got to travel, but now he's an owner. But now he's an owner. That's true. But now he's an owner of the Oakland or the Las Vegas Raiders. So I'm not sure.
He's an owner of the Raiders.
Part owner. It's small.
Yeah.
But see, that's behind the scenes. You need to be in the spotlight. Stay relevant.
All right.
That's what it's about nowadays.
Okay. Well, thank you for that Tom Brady moment. I'm loving him on Fox.
Okay. Aston Martin, they're actually better late than never. Okay, they're making their first plug-in hybrid supercar. You have to check this out in the Bloomberg terminal. Good. Yeah, the Valhalla, finally hitting production in 2025. It's about 4 years behind schedule. 1,064 horsepower, top speed 217 miles per hour. Only 999 will be made, so you got to act fast. The price wasn't said, but it's expected to cost more than $766,000. Wow. But the company's been struggling.
We'll see Matt Miller pulling up into the
He's got to get into that and ride it around the courtyard.
Yeah. Can I just say, in F1 right now, yes. As we speak, Sergio Perez of Mexico, there's this raging battle over what he's going to do with Red Bull. All these people, including at Aston Martin, are up in the air. It's like Max Fried on steroids. Mm-hmm. That's how I'd put it.
So we'll check it out. Hannah Elliott at Bloomberg, she works in Pursuits. All she does is travel the globe and drive these amazing cars all over the world. And then she has a podcast with Matt Miller, and they talk about cars.
That's not a bad gig.
That's not a bad gig. So I'm sure she will be behind the wheel.
Why aren't we doing that?
I don't know.
I don't know.
Matt Miller, Hannah Elliott, check out that podcast, because if you like cars, that's the one to go to, I think.
I've never forgiven Fargo. He got me into this Formula One thing, and I'm addicted to it.
Ooh.
And they have the Automist watch that you talked about. They sponsor it. It's
of course.
It's like men walking around with $1 million watches on their wrist.
Yep.
That's the kind of thing. You got one more?
Last one. I'll do this one quick, okay? It's a new trend in gift giving because the holiday season is here. Instead of buying gifts, what people are doing is that they're ordering a mix of mystery boxes. They're unopened, unclaimed mail. Where they're getting it, it's not the post office. So these big box retailers who can't figure out and they get things returned and they have all these packages, they actually hire third-party companies to come in and take care of the mess.
Really?
So those companies
are selling
them.
Mateo Christmas this year? Come on, Costco?
It's a surprise.
You're going to get a big box from Costco with mystery
No, because then you know what it is. But these are like unopened things. So you hand it to somebody and you're just waiting in anticipation, like, what's it going to be? What's it going to be?
All right.
Sometimes it could be a little bit, embarrassing because some of the things you don't know what they are. But this is the new thing. It's the whole element of surprise.
I didn't know that was a thing.
It's apparently a thing. It started during the pandemic because people were bored and these companies had packages to get rid of.
All right.
Lisa Mateo, the newspapers. Thank you.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast, available on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Listen live each weekday 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, TuneIn, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.